Taku Ingoa, ko Josephine Huti Anderson. Te Waahi tupu atu au ka rongo ngā wāhi ingoa o ngā whenua I mōhio au I roto o te rohe o Waitomo. Ngā kōrero ka tīmata ahau ki te kōrero mō ngā wāhi ingoa e whakahuatia I e tehi o ngā whenua. Well, Waipahihi is on the property of the Davis family, and it is where the water source for the farm is taken from, and it's been in existence for over 100 years. It is a natural source where the water comes up from under the ground, and you'll find that name Waipahihi used a lot throughout the country because that's what it means. It just comes up out of the ground. There were families living there. Our tupuna Te Rūtoto was the first person to have title of that land, and through whakapapa she was deemed to be the entitled person, and as a result of that I think we're the 4th or 5th generation to be still farming and living there. Te kake lived at Ngā Pikowai, and he took a fancy to this woman who lived up in an area now called Pohatuiri, which is the marae there. He hadn't actually made advances toward her, so he got a friend to take a message to her. His friend started off with the message, but on his way he decided he would show what Te Kake had written to several people, and there was a hui going on at one particular area, and of course it caused a lot of derision. The gossip got back to Ruihi, and because of her embarrassment of what had happened, she spurned Te Kake, and as a result of that he took his own life at a place that we now call Pohatu o Te Kake, which is very close to Waipahihi. Mapauriki is beyond the area of Waipahihi, and that is where Tāne Tinuro's oldest daughter, Te Oe, lived and married a man called James Holden. That name identifies that area where they live. It takes its name from a tiny little puna going up a ridge behind a man-made lake. It is said in the past that that water was where kokopu and that were seen to be in this tiny little puna. Tionui is where the Papakainga area is, and the Urupa has also taken that name, Tionui, and so we all know that Tionui is an oyster. Whether that name was derived from that food, I'm not sure of. Well, it takes in the Papakainga area and what we deem to be the area that Te Rūtoto owned. They started off with a kauta first. Later, they were to build a big whare, a 2-storied building. Had 4 bedrooms, I understood, a library and dining area, pantry and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, it was burnt to the ground. And according to Uncle Tamerewati's diary entries, it was burnt to the ground around about 1921. That is what has come out of reading his diary. Well, the fire was rumoured to have started by my mum leaving a candle on a wooden bench. It caught alight, and of course they weren't able to put it out. Well, Karakaraka is a point, unusual looking hill just beyond Tionui Urupa. And how these places got their names, I'm not sure of. Still known today as Karakaraka. Oh, the Mara is just below the top of Karakaraka, and it was a place where, well, the people that I'm aware of was my tupuna, John Charles Davis, and Te Toto, who grew hua whenua, vegetables, and riwai kumara, that type of food. Well, Suicide Rock is a bit of a tinihanga, something that the family often referred to. When my mum and dad used to have a disagreement, my mum would take the short walk over to this rock and sit up on top of it and sulk until such time as she felt better and return to the house, a happier person. Te One Hapai is over where a Pākehā family now reside, and their names are the Barneses. It is said that sand brought out from Marakopa was said to have come from a place called Hawaii, and it was deposited at Te One Hapai, and that's the name it became known by. Tamarewiti, who of course was the second oldest son of John Charles Davis and Te Toto. They lived there. He was married to Mātatira Te Moirua, and it was their family land that Tamarewiti helped to develop, but he also had his own adjoining land which he got from his mother, Te Toto. Whareana is an area beyond Te One Hapai, and I understood that was an area of our tupuna John Charles' third wife. Hurihia was her name. It also came under John Charles' management. He initially started off with a small area, which was Te Toto's holdings, but it grew to quite a large area of 1,500 acres. And he undertook, of course, to do Pākehā farming practices on it. And during the Depression, everything collapsed to the point where his children were forced to carry out a mortgagee sale of what he owned. During this period, John Charles died. He died in 1913. And so the burden really was left to his sons to complete putting things right. And as a result of that, 2 areas were given back to the families that owned the land that he was farming. Pehitawa is on the way over to Oparure, but it lies now directly opposite a venture park and farm called Altura Park. It sits within a gully. It has natural water flowing through it, beautiful bush, and this is an area where we actually saw remains of earlier people, Māori of course, and it appears that it was an area where quite a lot of battles took place because of the number of skeletal remains. There was a time earlier that it's been recorded that 2 pāpaku could be seen up in the branches of the trees. And I assume going through the process of the flesh and everything being shed and later to be put to rest in a permanent resting place. In the area of Pehi, there was a cave there right up until about in the 1940s. That those remains were still there. It was of a woman, and it lay in a waka, a small waka, not a huge one. We knew that it was in European times because it had a silk scarf covering her head. Going back over there some years later, we noticed that there'd been a rockfall and there was no evidence of her being there anymore. We don't know her name or anything. Yeah, we don't know the name of the cave where she was deposited. I understand that the Moirua whānau identify themselves as being part of that hapu, Ngāti Pihi. Well, Hihiwera is in the area of Orongohekeao, and of course, that's still in the area of Pehitawa. Hihiwera is an old marae of the Moirua family. Quite often, Nani Tira would go there and express sadness to that place. Tears would flow down her eyes. Orongohekeao is a rock hillside. It boundaries onto what we now know as Altura Park. There are still remains there, and I understand that Tangi Wharau, his remains were removed from. Many, many years after his death, but in the time of when Tamerewiti and Nani Tira were farming that area, the kōrero was for them was that this person, Tangi Wharau, his remains were uplifted and taken down to a marae called Korapatu and deposited in a tomb there. I had a young brother born around the same time, 1918 I understand he was born, and he was given that name, Tangi Wharau. Whare Tōtara was a name given to my brother who became known as Arthur. Whare Tōtara's name came about from a burial within the area of Pehitawa. My mum, Mereana, told me that when this person with that name was buried, he was buried within Pehitawa, of course, and before the burial took place, they lined the hole that he was going to be buried in with tōtara. Orouro is a point within the Pehitawa area, but it's on the highest point as you travel down to Oparure. Orouro has a romantic connotation for me, and the story my mum used to tell me was about this man who, when he desired this particular lady to come to him, he would play his ko'auau. Ngutuhihi, of course, is beyond, above the marae of Tokikapu, and it was an ancient area where marae was established, and we were very fortunate to have a man by the name of Kapitu do some fencing there. He came across the remains of buildings built in the ground. The walls of the whare were still there. The boundaries run along the top. This side of the junction going up to Ngā Tapuwai Road, but above the marae of Tokikapu, and it runs along that top of the bluff that we call Pohatu Whakairi. Puehunui is below Pohatu Whakairi, just beside the flow of the river, and this is where Tāne Tinoro and his family used to go to in the winter months for the food source that it provided, mainly eels and that type of food. Well, ōwhawhe is the maunga that our iwi of Ruapuha and Uekaha refer to as our maunga because it's within sight of our marae. Obviously, there was a pā site of old, of ancient times, but to actually say that anyone lived there, I can't confirm that. Kawawhia is a point of ōwhawhe. Ko Whiowhio became the home of Kingi Taniora Tāne Tinoro. He was one of the sons of Tāne Tinoro II, and it takes its name from the stream that runs below Horatea Bluff, and it makes its way down to Waingaro, another particular area where it connects with the stream there, but on its way it takes in a place we know as Wainini. Kakeka was the home of Tāne Tinoro's and Huti's older son, Okewhare, It's an area just further on from Ohine Tamaire. Tāne Tunarau actually died at Ohine Tamaire, but his tangihanga was held at Kakeka. Following Tāne Tunarau's tangi, he was taken and deposited in a ana or cave in the area of Parianiwaniwa. Well, Parianiwaniwa is where we still conduct burials. It's an old urupa. Ohine Tamaire, I understand in the past, was a area frequented by a lot of people. But later on, it was to be renamed Karamaha, because during the Depression, a lot of people were like swaggers, came through the area, and that's where they would go to spend the night till they were sustained, and then they'd move on. So that's how the name Karamaha came about, because of different types of people that arrived. My tupuna Tāne Tunarau, he was married to Tenekehanga. That was his first wife. They had no children, but they raised a whāngai, and her name was Huti, who was to become Tāne Tunarau's second wife. They lived on this particular block down here called Hauturu East 1A5C. The original name of Waitomo village was Taware. It was given the name after Chief Taware, who was from Ngāti Hau, was killed in this area. Taware is very significant to whānau, in particular of Tāne Tunarau, because that was where he lived. And then with the advent of the Otorohanga court sittings in 1886, he was to lose that whole area of 69 acres. The 1A5C boundaries, the domain, all the public areas down there, the post office, the museum, the school, the hotel, and it stretches up to the point of Kapongaro. Now that land originally was owned by his first wife, Tenekehanga. However, after the marriage between Huti and Tāne Tunarau, Tenekehanga then married Fred Mace, a Pākehā, who was later to become known as a co-discoverer of the glowworm cave. During this period, Tāne Tunarau and Tenekehanga exchanged this particular area, 1A5C, and Tāne Tunarau gave her another area. Right up until she died, she was looked after by Tāne Tunarau's children. The last place she lived at was at Tāne Tunarau's home, and that's where she died. And of course, we all know that by the time 1904 came around, the government were very, very anxious to acquire land within Waitomo because of the glowworm cave attraction. And the Crown decided that they would take that land because they weren't able to get Tāne Tunarau to sell his interests in the glowworm cave. The number totaled 14 at that time. A number of the owners, 5 of them, sold their interest, and the remaining 9 withheld theirs. First, they took it under the Scenery Preservation Act. Later, they were to find that that wasn't a secure act to take it under, so they exercised the Public Works Act. It wasn't until they actually took it that he moved up to Ohine Tamaire. After the death of Tāne Tunarau, Ohine Tamaire became Huti's, his wife's area. She passed it on to their daughter, Waiwhakehu, to Parako, to Kino, and to Purangi, children of hers. Parako was the one to eventually live at Ohine Tamaire and raise his children there. Rotomarama is now the Waitomo domain area, but it had a lake that spread right across from the domain area over to a place that we know as the headlands of the Repo swamp. Rotomarama was drained in the early 1900s when people like John Charles Davis and Okewhare Tāne Tinoro started to develop farming practices here in Waitomo. John Charles started farming practices here at the turn of the century, about 1906. By 1910, he was milking 106 cows, so Okewhare would have been the same. Rangiahua was a marae of Uekaha, and of course we all know that the name Rangiahua comes from Hawaii, and that was one of his pa. Well, Te Ana o Uekaha, as I have been told by my kaumatua, is located in the area of the domain, but across the river, beneath the areas of Kakeka and Ohene Tamaire. Well, the repo has significance for us as Ngāti Uekaha because that is where the union of Hinarangi and Uekaha took place. It is said that she travelled from Te Aroha to return to become Uekaha's wife to settle an utu issue that happened earlier regarding her parents. She travelled through the Repo and eventually ended up at Uekaha's cave, as we understand to be in the area of the domain. And the first words that Uekaha was to say to her was, "Nau I kau mai I Repo," to which she replied yes. He told her that he was a very old man and asked her, her reasons for being there. And she said she had been sent back by her people to become his wife. And so they got together. And of course they had a son named Kapetu. And Kapetu is the name that was passed on to the Kapetu Te Kanawa that we held in high regard here. Kapongaro, the story with that name, Kapongaro, is that a person was kidnapped from that particular area during the night. That's how the name of that puke became known as Kapongaro. Kapongaro is on my cousin's Willie Davis's property and the rest of his family. Ngā Pikowai is adjacent to the glowworm cave. It is significant in that the women of the past, after giving birth to a baby, would go there to have their first wash. It became a swimming hole for us as children. We used to go around from the Waitomo school and mid-afternoon have our swim and come back and feel just hotter than when we left. Te Puninga is the outlet of the glowworm cave where the water flows through the cave and then comes out at the bottom end. The outlet is adjacent to the car park that they have outside of the cave for tourists to park. And it comes out on the Whatakaraka and Haereiti and flows into the Tere Waitomo stream. Ruakuri is a significant place simply because the tūpuna Tāne Tinoro Tuatahi, or the first, was said to have come into the area of Waitomo and resided there for some time. He was a bit of a warmonger, and we understand from kōrero that he went around to different areas as far as Otorohanga and back to Waitomo, causing war with some of the people And in doing that, he eliminated the people who were first to have been here, Ngāti Hau. Tāne Tinoro the first did to return here. He was an old man, I understand, and he retired at a place called Mohoao, which is above the Ruakuri cave entrance. Ruakuri takes its name from the fact that kuri were found to have made the entrance to the Ruakuri their home. And of course there's been stories that have evolved from that particular area. They became known to the people when the residents used to go up there to hunt. And as a result of being in that area, these kuri would attack them. Mohoao, I understand, was the final home of Tāne Tinoro the first. After all his marauding, he returned there as an old man and eventually died there. Tapate Paiatua is just above Mohoao. It's a high hill or puke, but the name in itself is quite significant because it says a very tapu area of the gods. Pukemako is where Ted Barrett and his wife Niwa lived, slightly south of Ōwhawhe, up the Tapuai Road. Te Kariri was the original house site of a kaumātua named Hutukopa, prior to him moving to Te Mahingaroa, where his mokopuna now reside. Puke Whārangi is beyond Paria Niwa Niwa. I have no historical account of why it was named that, but it is mentioned in the Hauturu East boundary that was laid out during the 1886 for Hauturu East. It is two hills with a hapua in the middle that separates the two hills. Well, Ōpāpaka, I understand, was the final battle that took place between Tāne Tinoro the first and the iwi or the hapu of Ngāti Hia. After the conquering of that particular area and the people, it is said that Tāne Tinoro the first spread his korowai on the ground to signify that it was now his area. It has no name other than what we term it to be te takotoranga o te kahu o Tāne Tinoro. Kōwhai is down what we now call the Valley Road. It's in a flat area down there that runs alongside of the river. It lies between Billy Black's adventure tourism and Lawrence Holden's. Well, Hiki Hiki Ora is a very unusual point that can be seen from Tukikapu Marae. It's a square shape, and I think that happened because of animals tracking around it. But Hiki Hiki Ora was a significant place for burial, and my tupuna, Tāne Tinoro's mother, Ani Hokopu, is said to have been buried there. Tukikapu takes its name from the historical place named Tukikapu, because this is where they used to sharpen their tuki, their adzes, from the water that flowed down into a shallow tomo over a sandstone. And they used to hold these instruments in the kapu of their hand and rub it over the sandstone to get the shape. Tukikapu was actually built for convenience, really, because Parahamuti during that time was quite a difficult place to get to for modern emergent Māori. And so the concept of building Tukikapu was to make it easier access for people to get to, for people to go and look for work and spend their money, that type of thing. Kingi Taniora was the main instigator of building Tuki Kapu, that is the meeting house. He began that project in 1946 against the strong opposition of his mother, Huti. Huti was opposed to the building of the Matuaiwi whare, which was of course to become Tuki Kapu Marae, because of her loyalties to Parahamuti as it was known in those days. Kingi Taniora returned to the whare of Matuaiwi. He chose to be put into that whare and lay there while he was still very, very sick. Kingi Taniora was the first person to lie in that whare, eventually died there after a short period. Now Huiatahi, his part in the building of Matuaiwi was to give it its name, Matuaiwi. Yes, the name Matuaiwi came from a tupuna, from the Tainui Waka. On the left-hand side of Matuaiwi Marae, the pau